friends. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Today, May 15th, 2026, is an exceptionally packed day. Events are unfolding simultaneously across several front sectors, events that will shape the course of the campaign over the coming weeks. Running alongside all of this is a major diplomatic story. The Trump-Xi Jinping talks have concluded, and the outcome is already being felt on the oil market. Let's break it all down in order, starting on the ground. Zaporizhzhia axis, the northeastern flank, is crumbling. We begin with the Zaporizhzhia axis. This is where today's most significant news came from. To understand the scale of what happened, a bit of context is needed. The Kharkiv section of the front has been one of the most static stretches of the entire line over the past year. Ukrainian forces built a deeply layered defense here, fully aware that a breakthrough in this direction opens the road to Zaporizhzhia city. Every settlement along this axis has been held to the last at enormous cost in manpower and equipment. Today, the eastern group of forces published footage the military community had been waiting for. It documents the fighting for Cherivna, a small village that could hardly be called a strategically significant town in isolation, but one that sits squarely within the operational logic of the Kharkiv campaign as a key strongpoint on the northeastern flank. By all indications, the assault on this settlement had been grinding on for several months. The eastern group clearly waited until the result was conclusive enough to go public. The footage shows everything that has accompanied the final phases of most settlements in this theater: artillery preparation of positions, FPV drone strikes, and the Solntsepiok thermobaric systems working through fortified structures. Grinding, methodical work. And at the end, 4 Russian flags raised in different parts of the village. 4 flags over a settlement of a few dozen buildings is not symbolism. It is an unambiguous signal of full control, every block cleared, every position accounted for. The capture of Cherivna was subsequently confirmed by the Russian Ministry of Defense, meaning this is an officially recorded result, not a field report from a single unit. Now, what does this mean in practice? To the west of Cherivny, operational space opens up. The next major reference point in that direction is the Kharkiv urban agglomeration, roughly 15 to 16 kilometers away in a straight line. No one will be moving in a straight line, of course. Between the villages of Bilohoria, Luhivske and Cherivne, there are open fields, tree lines, and defensive pockets that need to be cleared before any further advance. The immediate task is to align the front along Malotokmachka, Cherivne, and further toward Hulyapol. Control over Cherivne also gives Russian units the leverage to push directly on Hulyapol, and given the current pace, official confirmation of that settlement should be expected within days. To put it plainly, the northeastern flank of the Kharkiv axis has started to collapse. This is not a catastrophic breakthrough or a rout. It is the same gradual, methodical squeezing that has characterized the entire campaign. The AFU are losing strongpoints one after another, and they are approaching each successive defensive line with fewer and fewer resources. Vozdvizhivka. Fighting inside the settlement. Further north of Cherivny, advances are also being recorded around the settlement of Vozdvizhivka. Mappers working from fresh objective control footage have logged a map correction. By available data, between 5 and 10% of the village is already under Russian army control, primarily along the southeastern outskirts. Notably, Ukrainian sources themselves published footage from this area today, and that is telling in its own right. The video shows Russian infantry groups moving between buildings, attempting to consolidate positions under fire from Ukrainian FPV drone operators. Several frames were geolocated. One strike landed on a building near Khmelnytsky Street, a second hit slightly further north. The geolocation confirms it. The fighting is taking place inside the settlement, not on its approaches. Full Russian control over Vozdvizhivka appears to be a matter of days. Once that happens, Russian units will gain another forward line from which to push west. Taken together, Cherivne, Hulyapol, Verkhnya Tersa, Vozdvizhivka, Rozdvianka, the outline of the next phase of the operation comes into focus. A push toward the Konska River, sustained pressure on the Kharkiv agglomeration, and eventual movement toward Zaporizhzhia city. Also published today, Footage of air-dropped bomb strikes on AFU positions near Vasyniuka, hitting forward positions and temporary deployment sites. Aviation is working this area steadily and consistently. Kharkiv axis, Vovchansk sector and the river crossing. The picture in the north today is mixed. The Vovchansk section of the front has come alive, and noticeably so on multiple sides simultaneously. From early morning, the northern group of forces reported improved positions around the settlement of Chaikivka. The village is tiny, possibly a dozen structures, but its significance is not determined by size, it is determined by geography. Chaikivka sits on the Ukrainian-controlled bank of the Vovcha River. That means Russian units are establishing a bridgehead in the central portion of the river bend, which creates the conditions for flanking pressure on Volokivka and Dvorichna, located just to the west. For context, earlier this year, Russian forces made gains around Zybin and Pokalyan, the western flank of the Volokivka direction. Now pressure is building from the east, from Chaikivka. In effect, two wedges, western and eastern, are beginning to converge. If the momentum holds, Volokivka and Dvorichna will come under encirclement threat, forcing the Ukrainian side to make a decision about withdrawing south toward Bilyi-Kolodyaz. The AFU, however, are clearly not going to cede these positions without a fight. Reporting indicates Ukrainian forces are already preparing a counterattack toward Chaikivka, which is operationally logical. The village is small and difficult to hold, and losing the supply corridor through Dvorichna and Volokivka directly impacts logistics for the entire northeastern salient of Kharkiv Oblast. Those settlements carry the supply lines feeding the most distant Ukrainian positions in the northeast of the region. If Russian forces cut that route, or even bring it under reliable fire control, the tempo of the advance in this sector could increase substantially. Expect very high-intensity fighting in the Volokivka direction over the coming days. This is shaping up to be one of the defining episodes of the Kharkiv portion of the campaign. Oskil River, Dvorichna sector, AFU counterattack. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army was not purely on the defensive today. On the Dvorichna section of the front, near the Oskil River, the AFU conducted a series of counterattacks. According to available reporting, Ukrainian units managed to at least partially restore control over the settlement of Otradne. Ukrainian sources published footage. The video shows Ukrainian soldiers entering the village and raising flags. The flag positions have been geolocated and confirmed. A caveat is warranted, however. Otradne is a small, heavily destroyed settlement, and by the nature of the situation, it is most likely sitting in a grey zone. This is not a case of Ukrainian forces dislodging Russian troops from held positions under sustained pressure. More likely, Russian units pulled back from this area because holding open empty ruins offers no tactical value. Ukrainian infantry moved in, raised a flag, which is a legitimate informational win in its own right. Whether it holds is a question the next 24 hours will answer. Sumy axis, the ring tightens. The Sumy axis deserves its own section. The situation here is developing quickly, particularly given that the May ceasefire expired and Russian forces immediately shifted into a higher gear on this stretch of the front. Significant activity is being recorded around Korchakovka and Mala Korchakovka. The operational logic is clear: widen the controlled zone along the contact line and create the conditions for a deeper push into Sumy Oblast. As recently as May 14th, Russian aviation was delivering massed air-dropped bomb strikes on AFU positions near Khotin, a textbook preparatory pattern ahead of a ground operation. And already today, mappers are logging substantial map corrections around Novosik and Krapivshkina. Grey zones are being added, territory that, by current assessments, may already be under Russian control. Infiltration corridors are also being flagged. Russian infantry is attempting to bypass Novosik from the flanks and reach the rear of the Ukrainian grouping still holding positions around Sadki, deep inside a large forested area. The logic of what is happening here is not hard to read. Russian forces are attempting to encircle the Sadki area together with the surrounding forest, cut the Ukrainian grouping off from its supply lines, and force a withdrawal. It is a classic technique applied successfully at other points along the front. The battle for Sumy Oblast, which we have been tracking for several weeks, is gathering momentum. Advances are also being recorded along the M02 highway. Worth noting, pro-Russian sources had been reporting movement in this direction as far back as early April, specifically claims dated April 1st about Russian units pushing along this axis. At the time, there was no verified confirmation. Today, for the first time, objective control footage has surfaced that actually substantiates those reports. The border checkpoint on this section of the state boundary is, by available evidence, now under Russian army control. The direction of advance points toward the city of Kharkiv, which, it bears remembering, was already struck during the large-scale bombardment campaign that ran from May 13 to 14, 2026. The bigger picture, why the deep strikes matter. Before moving to geopolitics, it is worth laying out the overall logic of what is happening along the contact line. Because that logic explains why Russian operational tempo is currently this high. The Ukrainian side is systematically pursuing one strategic objective: stripping Russia of its export capacity. Strikes on oil infrastructure, on refining facilities, on logistical hubs, all of it is part of a single coherent concept. Cut the Russian economy off from export revenues, reduce the financial fuel feeding the military machine. This is not tactics, this is a war of attrition at the strategic level. Russia, in turn, is conducting large-scale strikes across Ukrainian territory with a fundamentally different aim. Destroy logistics, disrupt the flow of reinforcements, knock out the transportation corridors. Every destroyed river crossing, every rail junction put out of action, every resupply convoy eliminated on its way to the front, all of it feeds directly into the pace at which Russian units advance along the contact line. The spring-summer campaign is underway, and its tempo will be shaped largely by how effectively Russian forces degrade Ukrainian logistics before the AFU can shift reserves to the threatened directions. Trump and Xi Jinping talks, results that speak for themselves. Now geopolitics, and here the most eloquent indicator is not official statements, not press releases, not diplomatic formulations. The most honest indicator of the Trump-Xi Jinping summit's outcome is the oil market. This morning, on a Friday before the close of global trading sessions, WTI crude hit $104 per barrel. And kept climbing. The market votes with money. And it has said everything there is to know about these talks. The market is pricing in two scenarios. Either Trump steps out and says something categorically new that crashes prices back to $90, in which case there is something real to point to. Or there is no real progress, and prices continue their upward move. Based on the American president's most recent statements, the first scenario is looking increasingly unlikely. Trump said it plainly. Military operations against Iran can resume at any moment. Some analysts go further, arguing that the moment Trump lands back on American soil, the operation will pick up where it left off. On top of that, Trump assessed the degree of mission completion in Iran at 75% and made clear that the United States could return to finish the job. This is no longer diplomatic pressure. This is an unambiguous signal. So what, concretely, did the China talks produce? According to Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Beijing provided assurances, possibly verbal only, that it would not directly supply weapons to Iran. The operative word is directly. Just the day before, a detailed article was published outlining the scheme. China will continue arming Iran, but through third-country intermediaries, reportedly via African middlemen. That way, no publicly traceable chain links Chinese suppliers to Iranian recipients. Major Western outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, won't be able to print a clean Beijing arms Tehran story. On paper, China keeps its hands clean. In practice, nothing changes. This is a familiar diplomatic architecture, one in which both sides preserve face while the underlying reality stays exactly as it was. The Taiwan question deserves a separate mention. It was not substantively addressed. The American side, as it consistently does, avoided any specifics on the island's status and future. That tells you the central fault line in US-China relations has not moved. And in the months ahead, it may well sharpen further. The near-universal consensus among analysts who followed these talks: there was no real breakthrough. The two sides met, exchanged positions, and parted. The Iranian knot remains tied, and that knot will continue to drive the trajectory of events across the Middle East. Putin in Beijing. What May 20th could bring. Against this backdrop, the Russian president's scheduled visit to China on May 20th deserves close attention. The Putin-Xi meeting will take place just days after the Trump-Xi summit. The timing is not coincidental, and the logic here is interesting. It is entirely plausible that Trump intends to use this visit as a back channel to send a message to Moscow, routed through Beijing, on the Iranian file, the Ukraine track, and the broader range of issues currently left unresolved. Diplomacy through intermediaries is nothing new in international relations. The question is, what signal exactly gets transmitted and how substantive it turns out to be. Watch what comes out of Beijing on May 20th. It may prove to be one of the pivotal moments in the geopolitical calendar over the coming weeks. That is the full picture for today. It was a dense one. Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Sumy, oil at $104, Trump and Iran. A lot of moving parts, and through all of it, the sense that these are not separate stories, but components of one large process that is continuing to accelerate. If this breakdown was useful, please leave a like. It genuinely helps the episode reach more people. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget the bell. YouTube deliberately throttles the reach of channels like this one. Without your engagement, new episodes simply don't find their audience. Take care, friends. Until the next episode.